What's going on, advocates? Welcome to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Today with me is a special guest. I always get excited when I got the therapist in the building. I don't like to miss a credential when I have y'all on, so please introduce yourself to the people.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rashida Henry, and I am the CEO and founder of Nose No Face Mental Health and Wellness Counseling and Consulting Company, where we assist millennials between the ages of 21 and 38 with developing insight into that which is holding them back, gaining clarity on career goals, and transitioning into their purpose.
Well, all right, okay. You said a mouthful there, and we're going to break every little bit of that down because I think everything is a integral part of why you're doing what you do and why you got so specific in the niche of it. So what got you started in the field? Let's start there.
So interesting enough, I have a parent that is actually a counselor. So when I was young, I was like in high school. I always remember like me visiting my mom's college, the campus that she was on, because she went back to school in her adulthood. So I always remember visiting her college campus and just always being very interested by, going in the library with her and just, walking around the campus. And so naturally, like I took an interest to the field, just kind of coming up behind her. And then later in life, when it was finally time for me to graduate and go to college, I was like, okay, I might tap into the psychology thing, because I didn't really know much about other fields, but I just knew my mom, was a clinical counselor. So I hit the psychology field and I did really, really well after I graduated with my bachelor's degree in psychology. And then I just transitioned right into a clinical counseling degree program over at Eastern University, which is over in St. David's, PA. And so from then on, like I really, really just love the field. I enjoy helping people. But what I will say is while it sounds very streamlined, that like the way in which I got to the field, it definitely wasn't that way at all. So I'm sure we'll kind of tap into more how like my journey has gotten to the place of private practice and kind of honing into the niche. But that's my initial exposure to the field.
You said something this is the first time I think I've even either never asked this or heard this. How was it being the what is the word the daughter of a counselor? Because now how do you turn off mom and how do you turn on and how do you know when you turn on mom and turn off counselor and then turn off counselor and turn on mom?
Interestingly enough, it wasn't like odd because my mom, she's not an overbearing person. She's very like very calm, and she invites her ideas and suggestions very, very gradually. So because she's that way, she was never very like overbearing with, you should try it this way, or you should do things this way. Well, in the textbook, like she was never a person like that. My mom always kind of like, just introduced things very gradually. And she always did things with grace and a spirit of excellence, which is why I think I got a touch of that also. But her and my grandmother were always like that. But needless to say, even though my mom had a background in counseling, again, in her degree studies, you get a lot of the theory and practice, but it's very different from being intentional about self-care, implementation, and things like that. So I always try to make the separation because sometimes people say, oh, when you have a parent in counseling, that's why you turned out that way, or that's why you didn't. No, it's one thing when you're in the studies of it, but the application of clinical practice and coping skills, and that takes work and practice. And so my journey, even though I had the exposure early on, I still had a very long journey until I got to the place that I am today. So it still was a lot of hard work and learning and insight that had to be developed over the way.
I like that explanation. It was a question that I had. I got one that popped right up because you said something, but I want to make sure I get everything out of that part of it. Oh, because you had a parent that was a counselor and you seen of course you see the good side and you see the bad side. How were you able to still see the bad side or see past the bad side of doing it? You get what I mean? All the negative points of like, oh man, I'm dealing with all these other people problems and I'm probably losing my, like, how were you able to still see past all of that?
Well, in terms of my own or my mother's,
Well,
her
no,
the people
like
that she
sometimes you know too much about a field because you don't want to go. It's like, no, my mom did that. Like, and I seen the
got it,
headache she was going through. Like, I'm
got it.
going totally different from that.
Got it. So it's so funny because I think that for me, when I was coming out of high school, I don't know why, because my mother and her sisters all went to college, but I really wasn't college focused. Like I don't know, like I always got really good grades in school, but I really wasn't really college focused, and I really, hadn't done a lot of research of what career options were out there, like the traditional things that were always said to me, like be a teacher, be a nurse, be a doctor, but I didn't really know much about many career paths. So just having that initial exposure for counseling is kind of what helped me to kind of go that direction. So and because my mom carried it so well, you know what I mean? Just, seeing her meet with clients, and her specialty field is children. So just kind of seeing her carry it so well is kind of why I never got turned off to it. But then also because I just, during that time when I was a senior in high school, I didn't have a lot of exposure to other things. I was what you call like a shelter kid, I guess, in comparison to a lot of my counterparts that kind of like were just out there involved in a lot of things. I was, relatively sheltered. And even though my parents, put us in a lot of learning environments to help facilitate our gifts, I just didn't know a lot about other career paths. So I just kind of naturally went that way. And it just somehow ended up working for me.
No, and it's like what do you call it? Happy accidents. Mind you, this podcast started out of me just therapy for myself, expressing myself through arts. And then as I started diving deeper, I'm like, when the heck did I get in school to become like a therapist? Like it just happened. Like I didn't. If you would have told me 3 years ago, it wouldn't have went like that. So you talked about like it wasn't a straight path. So even though you had that initial like impact from your mother's experience, you started to navigate and create your own. What were some of the hurdles of going through that whole, up and down during the time?
Yeah, so I experienced, tons of hurdles along the way, despite the initial exposure to the counseling field. But, in my young adult years, well, my youth years, I dealt with a lot of challenges such as low self-esteem, low confidence. I never was very, very confident in my abilities. I always struggled with kind of like trusting my own decision making. Which caused me to defer to a lot of my friends for decisions. So like, should I do this? Should I do this? Like I never could lean to my own decisions. I just wasn't confident enough in myself. And so a lot of times when it would come to like me kind of like putting myself out there, whether comes to like a singing or dancing and things like that, I was always so shy. I was such a very shy kid. And because of just me not being very confident in myself, it caused me to experience depression very, very early on. I'm talking about like middle school, high school years. I was very, very sad because I always felt like I was so different. So that's where it really started, my struggle. And then, over the years, I began to kind of come out of my shell, moving into high school. And then when I got to college, well, excuse me, grad school at Eastern University, I was faced with the tragedy where my brother had died suddenly. And it was, really, really tragic because I come from a family where we're very tight knit, very, very close. And so my brother, his passing at 38 came out of the blue, and I was just like numb. I didn't want to do life anymore. Like I legit didn't want to do life anymore. And so, just a combination of that tragedy and just some of the low confidence that I already had, like I was knocked off my path many times. But thank God that I was grounded by way of, the field and some other supports that helped me to kind of push past it. So it's been difficult. It's been very difficult over the years, but definitely it's a testament that with support and the necessary skills and counseling, which I'm a firm believer in counseling, believe me, but with tools such as that and support, and just the support of friends that want to see you do well, I've been able to push through.
Once again, you said a mouthful, and I want to make sure I capture all of it because I feel like if someone listening, I always think about the person that they're not as confident. So they want to hear somebody that's going through certain things that they can, pull information from and try to utilize that. So for even myself, I'll use myself as an example. People think with like podcasts and speaking or some of these things, a lot of these things went through so many ideas. I wanted to start a podcast in 2012. It was really early. 2012, really early. I wanted to start. I tried to get all my friends. I'm like, hey, this new thing, podcasting, and this podcast didn't come out. This one by myself didn't come out till 2018. So can you imagine all those years knowing something could possibly be good
Mm,
and not doing them because you're looking for validation from everybody else? So what is
wow.
that barrier or breakthrough? Because mind you, I still got go through that right now of like second guessing myself. Like I'm looking for approval from loved ones and friends, and it's like I'll bring something up and it'll get shot down and everyone will consider the situations or the things, and I'd be like, all right, well maybe it's not a good idea. Like how do you break through that to now? We'll get into the credentials or all the other stuff you're doing later, but how do you break that down from the shy, the tentative person up to who you are now? Because I'm sure you probably battle with it some extent today, but what do you do when you even feel like that anymore?
Absolutely. So to start, for me, it was an undertone of fear. And again, as you referenced, like the low self-esteem and the confidence, all of that was like this core thing that I battled with, that I wasn't good enough. It was this core thing. And so for me, it took a very long time for me to get out of this shell, because naturally I'm introverted. And similarly to you, like people, I'm like a speaker. I speak and do workshops and I'm in front of people a lot now. But anybody who knows me know that I'm, just naturally an introvert. So I really enjoy like my alone time. And I just, I didn't have any problems during COVID, must I say. When
Me
they
neither.
said
I
shut the
promise you.
place down, yes, because I was in the house creating. Like I did so well because that's just how my personality is. But for me, it was just this undertone of fear. Just worrying about, what people are going to say. Are they going to judge me? Are they going to, am I going to be rejected? If I put myself out there to want to do something, am I going to get the support? And so I, just all of this second guessing, and overthinking about everything, over analyzing everything, which stood in the way, of me and my gift and my opportunities. You know what I mean? I just was constantly second guessing myself, until one day, I just wanted to be very, very intentional. And I knew there was a problem. This is, in my earlier 20s, I was like, things can be better, and I remember just saying to myself, I said, I cannot continue to live like this. I cannot continue to be unhappy. And so I remember connecting with the therapist early on and just kind of like processing through a lot of these challenges that I had. And I remember just gradually, like a gradual confidence being developed, over time, just helping my counselor, just helping me to see that, Rashida, you see things this way because of this, or have you considered this possibility? So just really the counseling experience has just opened my perspective to see things in various ways. And a lot of times where you come from, certain households, you have like a one track way of thinking. You don't really consider all the other possibilities that can happen. You really kind of have this tunnel vision of, things are this way. And, because that's all you've known. So when I met with my counselor and I was able to see things outside of the box, it really helped me to develop confidence. And I just one by one begin to just kind of like overcome my fear places. I begin to speak more. I begin to kind of connect more with other people. And yeah, I've been like on fire ever since. But it was gradual. It didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process.
No, and you just actually helped me. So I learned a important word called reframing. I'm sure you've
Yes.
taught people that and learned it, and it was like it's not that you're scared to do the action that you're trying to do. For me, anyway, it is you're worried that you want to do good. So it's like reframing of like, no, I just want to do good. I want to make sure I do good. You're not scared. You just excited of like making sure it is well received. And I'm like, oh, so I'm not scared. Like, so that mean I can do it. And if I'm preparing myself, like even with this podcast or doing certain things, I'm like, then you'll be straight because you're preparing. Like, even for our interviewers, like if I'm prepared enough, I don't have to be so scared to have this conversation with
Mhm.
Rashida. Like I'm prepared
Right.
enough to actually have it in a way where she feels like it was a good interview. The audience feels like that, but I had to reframe it because before I used to get on these things and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to say. What we going to talk about? What's going to conversation? How do I make it an hour? How do I? And it's like, bruh, even when people ask like, what's the questions? I'm like, it took time for me to learn. Like, there is no questions. I just want to have a conversation with you.
Exactly, exactly. And that's so it's genuine and authentic. So I appreciate that about this. Yeah.
So one of the things you brought up, as you were, so you went to school and you start to get into the field. You brought up study versus application, and I don't want to miss that because I think again, as I'm learning in school myself and learning the things, you learn stuff, you get the degree, and then reality hits of like, no, this is how it is. So now you got to take that degree and mold it into the positions that you're placed in, if that makes sense. I don't know if that question makes sense.
It does. It does. It definitely does. But definitely, especially for people that are in school now, the didactic learning experience of like sitting down and learning and reading, when you're going through that process of like trying to get your degree and trying to get good grades and all of that, you really don't always and don't often create a space to be intentional about that whole self-care. And I can only speak for myself. There might be other students out there that do it really well, that can find a balance. But I know for me back then, when I was in school, like I was so hyper focused on getting good grades, passing licensing exam, that I was like super focused on the theory of things. And I wasn't so much as intentional about my own self-care and my own wellness. And so it didn't come until years down the line when I had graduated from school. And again, after I graduated school, that's when I finally connected with therapists. So like we were charged to connect with the therapist when we were in school. And I had did that briefly and then it ended. But it wasn't until I graduated later down the line. And then I finally got serious about my wellness journey and began to investigate various wellness practices that I actually began to kind of reshape my life in such a way that I was priority. Because see, for me, over the course of years, I had always prioritized my career and my education. As a Black woman, I just, that's what was kind of like at the forefront of my households. And I noticed that in my household that we got praised when we did well in school. So, and whenever I got good grades, my parents were happy. Family was happy. I was applauded. We did celebrate it. And so for me, down the course of the road, that's what always stayed on the forefront of my mind. Nothing else, but I want to do well in school. I'm going to get good grades because that's what makes my family happy. And so I was always super focused on like education and knowledge. That whole piece of wellness, I neglected.
Mm.
I super neglected. But fast forward to today, I found a way to create balance. And so now, as I move forward in my life, I give back by educating people on how to incorporate both. But I didn't mean to defer from your question, but yes, theory, the learning practice of it, and the actual experiential of, being intentional about the implementation of wellness and the skill based and the sets, the different things that you learn, that's very different than being in school, the textbook smarts of theory.
Now I'm lucky to be around people like yourself. So I people already know the story, but to just quickly tell you, I dropped out of school 10 years ago. So this is the first time I'm back in 10 years. So I guess I'm an adult learner, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm lucky to know a Rashida while I'm in school. So I can know the application. Like I'm surrounded by therapists and they're telling me like, all right, this is what's actually happened versus the theory. So learn the theory because you need to have like that in your practice. But this is how you practice the theory, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. And yours is a blessing that you like are going through this simultaneously. Like you're out there doing the work and you're learning about the work simultaneously. I think that's so beneficial. Whereas a lot of times people are like kind of doing the education first and then doing the experiential part later. But the fact that you're doing both, you can kind of see, both sides to it, which to me enhances the learning experience.
Yeah, no, I feel lucky every because it's all anytime I have a therapist on or someone that been in is like, no, you're in a good position just because again that worry, that confidence of like, man, maybe I just need to focus on this or maybe like so I'm still like, am I in a good position? Like still second guessing, even though it's like I look like it got it together, but I don't. I'm every day I'm like waking up with this calendar behind me, like, I need to ask some of this stuff.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
What was I had a question. It was in regards to, all right, you said you went to school, application, study, getting serious with self-care was the one. I'm like, that's gonna be the title of this podcast, getting serious with your self-care. Because I think that is definitely something that people need to take more intentional in regards to, like, I think there's a movement right now with like mental wellness, but is it practicing what you preach? And I think
Come on.
um that's a lot of and I'm guilty of it, if I'm being honest. Like I just started writing in my journal again, or I just started, working out. And of course, everyone does it during New Year's, like you have that obligation. But it's one thing to kind of, and preaching to the choir, but it's one thing to kind of know better and then don't do better. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
you hear it,
Yes.
you're bringing people on. You just said get serious with your mental wellness, and then after I turned the podcast off, like, man, I'm not doing anything. You get what I mean? And so
Mhm,
now it's like,
mhm.
well, you gotta, practice it. Like, why are you telling people to do it, but then you not doing it? What is the
Right.
thing in that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know for me, and I know this is the case for many people, especially in the African American community, like I was operating for so long on autopilot that I mean, I was so removed from my emotions. I was so removed from like honoring the things that I was thinking. Like, and for lack of better words, it was almost like I was operating out of body. And I know people are like, well, what the heck is she talking about? Like, it's really, I was so disconnected from my thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I didn't realize it until fast forward to today. I didn't realize how disconnected I was. I mean, and it really manifests too. We have to be mindful in the way that we eat. It manifests like in a way, that we interact with people. And so like, even for me, like I, was eating in response to the different emotions that I was feeling. And I didn't even realize it. I was, I remember one time I was sitting on my mom's couch. This is a while back, sitting on my mom's couch and looking at the TV, just, and I'm not much of a TV watcher now, but I was just like this eating. My mom looked at me, she said, stop. She had brought to my attention that like, I'm literally, whenever I'm nervous or anxious, overwhelmed, I just eat. And it was just literally in response to my nerves and anxiety. I was not hungry at all. Until she brought that to my attention years ago, I didn't even realize it was a problem. So I say that to say, really, really, we have to learn to really get in tune with ourselves, be very present with our emotions and our feelings. And just, I look at life like holistically, just because the way we eat impacts our mood. Physical activity or lack thereof can impact our mood. So everything is like interconnected within our bodies. A lot of times when I sit with therapy clients and they come up with goals, which we always do like a goal plan, treatment plan in therapy, just to kind of, initiate a roadmap for where they want to go. But every time I sit with therapy clients, they are always surprised at how many of their goals interconnect. You know
Mm,
what I mean? So if you struggle with a lack of boundaries, and then you say, okay, I have another goal of, us building healthier relationships, that stuff is interconnected.
mm.
Having a lack of boundaries is going to impact you being able to maintain healthy relationships. And so a lot of times people don't realize just how we are as human beings. It's just like a holistic thing. Like what you do here can impact this. What you eat can impact, like we're all just, just holistic beings. And so usually in my approaches to therapy, usually I go at it from that route. But for me, essentially, like I had to get myself together by being intentional with my own therapy, planning wellness in my day to day. And then also just kind of like having accountability and support circles that just remind me that, I am worthy, and just remind me that, Rashida, you're important. You're more important than whatever job you commit to, whatever roles you have in society. You are important. So a combination of those types of supports has helped me stay on track.
No, I love it. Actually, it's always a good reminder to hear it outside yourself, like someone else saying it. So I'm gonna try to keep on track as much as possible. It's a daily, everyday struggle, but you just gotta wake up every time you got breath in your body and just start again, even if you mess up. It was something you said earlier. Now I just remembered that question about uh achievement being like a goal, like that was where you got the praise from parental. Like anytime you did something good, that was like that's where you equated success from it. Am I right in
Mhm,
saying that? Um,
mhm,
and so I'm in this stage now where I don't even say I'm in this stage now. My mom's listening, so I'm trying to word this right, or she may potentially listen. And so, and you don't even have to use it in your context of family, because I know these things are sensitive. But um, I'm learning now that it was certain things that were missing in childhood that parents feel like it's a bad thing, because they, like, I did the best that I can, like I made do with what I had. And so you can't criticize, or I don't think you are allowed to criticize what you are lacking, if that makes sense. And
Mhm.
so I'm having a hard time, and I guess you said it with boundaries, addressing that while also not making them feel bad. You get what I mean? It's like there was some things lacking, but if you can't have the conversation about it, but it's almost like I'm not attacking you. I'm just letting you know what I feel like I was missing. You get what I mean?
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
I bring that up in a question form as a therapist. Like I said, I tell you all the time, whenever I have therapists, they're going to charge for this tomorrow. So I try to get my little therapy sessions into when I got it. So talk about the kids, or because there's a generational movement now where people are expressing what they were lacking and what they didn't have, or whatever the case may be. But I think there's a reflection of your family may not have received this mental health eureka that you all of a sudden had, or this you, even though you're going to therapy, they may not be going. So you're unpacking things that they haven't even touched yet. So the question in there is, how do you deal with all of that, like family trauma, where your family doesn't want to participate in the fixing of it, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So first of all, and this is like a really good stuff. This is good stuff because this is, what when I was growing up, this is what I was dealing with, as well as I began to make my transformation. But the first thing I would definitely offer is to just extend grace to yourself before I even, encourage people to kind of like address things with other people or kind of go that route. Is just offer grace to yourself. Because again, a lot of times we, self blame. We're blaming ourselves for things that our parents did or things that happened to us or people that failed to protect us when we grew up. We're blaming ourselves for the things that really were out of our control. So first, I just encourage people to extend grace to themselves. Number one, and then even with our parents, I encourage people to extend grace to their parents, and that looks different case by case. But the reason why I say that is because, as you referenced, they reared us, they reared you based upon the knowledge and information that they had at the time of which they raised us. Most of what we got was because that's what they got when they were young, and a lot of times there was a lack of information as it relates to the effectiveness of mental health. I know in my household, until my mother went to school to be a counselor, we didn't talk much about self-care and therapy. I know um, on my dad's side wasn't much of a conversation. My grandparents definitely wasn't a conversation. So definitely, I know when I started my journey, I had to learn to extend grace to them for the fact that, with my parents, I know they did the best that they can with the information that they had. So just starting by extending grace to them. And then as you move forward, just understanding that, I always tell people this: when you're in therapy, your emotional depth increases, your level of insight increases. And so people around you, or we just have to be mindful that they may not have the same emotional depth. They may not have the level of insight. And so you have to handle them with grace also. And so what I do typically when I approach people, that I may want to offer a word of advice to, and this is not Counselor Rashida, this is just Rashida, right? So if I'm approaching someone that I might want to offer, some recommendation or advice to, like in my family that may not be on board with the whole therapy thing, I don't go at it very critical, and I don't go at it, very, like, I don't try to attack them or criticize them. What I might do is, again, not at the point of intensity, like when you're like in a battle or when you all are like at odds. That's not when you want to bring it up. But when you're in more of a settled space where you might just be able to freely dialogue, I would just bring up, hey mom, do you remember when this happened when I was little? Yeah, because now I noticed how it kind of still bothers me today. Or dad, when you used to kind of criticize me when we were little, like I kind of still feel a little bit impacted by that. So what I mean by that is not when you all are like at odds and yelling and arguing, but maybe when there's more subtle, times, in your engagements, maybe putting it on the table. And I always tell people, even with that, it's a risk, because again, when you say that, people may not be receptive. It is very risky, but I always tell people it is worth trying. It's a part of the healing process, but just be prepared if the other individual is not receptive on the other end. But at the end of the day, you plant the seed, and I always say God will do the increase. So again, even if it's just you offering a nugget that, hey, therapy is useful, or have you tried therapy? If that's all you can do to get through to them, maybe later down the line something will extend, and then they'll actually be able to be ready to receive and take the next steps to their journeys.
Beautifully put, and I salute that information. Like, that's a true therapist right there. Because I was she can sniff the rebuttal of someone saying, "But what if they're not receptive of this?" And it's like, it's risky. I'm letting you know the risk right before you even do it. Still risky and giving alternatives. So I appreciate that advice because I know it helps somebody. It was a question. Why did I keep? You've been saying some stuff, and I'm like, it throws the question that I have. Well, because I'm paying attention.
And I know I talk a mile a minute, so I apologize.
Oh, I remember the question now. So you're in the field, and then now you reach a niche of 18 to 34. I think you said, or around that age of
21 to 30.
okay, 38. Millennial mental health, or in that space. How did you get to that niche out of all of the spaces and credentials that you could have went in and utilized your gifts and talented? Why did you choose that one to provide the most value to?
Mhm. The reason why I kind of picked that age range is because it's such a critical age range, and in the developmental process. But the main reason why I kind of hyper focus on that age is because that's that age range is when I had and experienced the most struggle. Around that 20, early 28, 20 something ish age is actually when I was referencing my brother earlier. He passed away. And so all the things that I had been struggling with over the year were like, it was like an extra weight thrown on me when I had experienced that. And so there was so much struggle and unhappiness there. And I remember, like, kind of years following that, is when I began to be introduced to therapy and become more investigative about various wellness practices. Mind you, I had already had my degree, but I just wasn't intentional. And so when I finally, actually began to be exposed to wellness tools and actually looking at how other cultures do things, even beyond therapy, how to involve wellness in your life, even beyond therapy, that was very attractive to me. And so I began to explore and then begin to apply. And so for me, as I begin to find things that worked for me in terms of wellness and found things to create balance in my own life, I then wanted to reach back down and pull other people up to show them how it was done. Because the thing about millennials, which is very, very important, is we learn best, in my opinion, we learn best from people that we can relate to. You know what I mean? It's one thing when you have people talking at you, you should do this, child, as a parent talking it, but and talking down to you, but we kind of receive best from someone that we can actually relate to. And so I said, you know what? I know there's a lot of people like me that are still stuck and struggling. And I felt a responsibility to my group, to my community, to reach back down and pull people up. And I kind of recognized my privilege in that. Like I said, I had a parent, even though things weren't squeaky clean for me, but I had a parent that was in clinical counseling. I had access to education very on. And, I went to a private school, had different um, fortunes that, I'm thankful for, but I counted that a privilege. And I said, it would behoove me to sit up here and portray being well, right? While everybody else is suffering. So that's when I kind of took a charge and said, you know what, Rashida, the work doesn't stop here. You got to go back. You got to go back, reach down and pull other people up. And so that's why I kind of really begin to hone in on millennials, because, I kind of relate to them best. And then also, like, that's just my group. I don't know. I love working with millennials. I do. I don't know.
Well, of course, I'm a millennial, so I can sniff that out too. Of like you being, and what you said is so true about being relatable. We're kind of that middle generation of between no internet, no technology, social media, and like when we was writing letters as opposed to emails. Like we seen the last of that. Whereas like
Yes.
my son, he doesn't know nothing about, like, why would you do that? That would take forever.
Right.
So No, I appreciate that. And I never thought about it. I forgot the other part that you said, but you said exploring something else, like explore, and I forgot what you're saying.
Investigate wellness practices there, or
Something along the lines, but you saying that made me realize that's kind of why I started this podcast, and I never even realized that what I was doing. I was learning so much information that I wanted to give it back out to people, and by bringing on experts like yourself in the field is like, no, like y'all got to hear this, like, and hopefully I can like do something for it to be like building a library of wellness and
absolutely.
let you see like an encyclopedia of like, no, you can do it like this, you can do it like this, like there's many different versions, like in, like you said, it's counseling, but also there's other things out there and you pick which one works for you. And I think
Yeah.
that's helping me discover like what you just said, like maybe that was what I've been trying to do this whole time, or that's one of the things I've been trying to do anyway.
Yes, and I think that it's wonderful that you are giving people access to the information by way of bringing people onto your platform, because so many people they just don't have access to the information. And I've learned that, it's not even that people don't want to be well, but when you don't know another way, you just
Mhm.
gonna do what's familiar. You know what I mean? But when you actually expose people to new, and I was just talking to somebody earlier, and they were just like, when somebody sees you living well, like you are an example for your culture. That's why I always be looking. I'm like, yes, you are such a good example for a lot of these young brothers, because a lot of them don't know any way out. You know what I mean? I'm fortunate enough, and I always tell people, and I have to remember this, that I travel the world a lot. But there are some people that don't see beyond their block. And so
Mhm.
how can I judge? And this is why we got to have people that look like us advocating on a political level, because a lot of those people that don't look like us, they're judging us based on the information that they don't have. We have to remember a lot of the trauma that these individuals experience, and a lot of people have not left their block. So
Mhm.
again, their minds are some people's mindsets are very, very limited. And we talk about the increase in violence and why all of these things occur. These trauma responses, which cause people to be very, very impulsive. Like all of these things are factors that a lot of times people at the top don't take into consideration. You understand what I'm saying? And so it's just like I really applaud people like you that are really modeling that things can be done differently, that life does not have to stay on the block. You can be very expansive, and you can live well. And so I do appreciate that you're giving the community access to information by way of your platform.
No, thank you for that. Because I try to say like I know I'm old enough to know better, but young enough to still relate, and I'm trying to capitalize while I have it. Because once you lose it, it'd be like, yo, get out of here. Like we don't care. We not listening to you. Like and like y'all in the streets, and I understand that, but I'm on the sidewalk, so I know what's going on in the streets, but I know what's going on in this other area too, in the house, like what they're doing in the building, and like
Yes,
just trying to find a bridge to like it's okay to come on the sidewalk. Like it's okay. And then
yes.
for you who are like scared to come off the porch, it's okay to understand someone that's in the streets and what they're doing.
Mm,
And kind of like just understand that mindset. And I think just that you thank you. I'll say that. Thank you.
yeah.
You mentioned it a few times and I don't want to go past it because I felt like it was like a catalyst for a lot of the things you do, like the trauma and grief of losing your brother. Um with COVID, with gun violence in the city of Philadelphia, can you talk about people or speak to the point of people dealing with grief and loss and people dying from the gun violence, dying from COVID, just loss, like loss of job, like loss of
Yeah.
outside where people like, yo, I can't do what I used to do. Like just so much loss in the experience and how like someone can like dig in and kind of pull himself out of that or manage it. Actually, that's a better word, manage with the loss and grief.
Absolutely. So first to acknowledge pretty much what you just referenced, that, grief extends far beyond death. So while I had referenced, a death experience that I, encountered, which was very traumatic, as it relates to my brother, grief extends to relationships, careers, many things, the loss of a pet, as you referenced in COVID, there are a lot of people that lost people by way of death, but it can extend to loss in general. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do as it relates to like grief and loss, because those underlying feelings of like sadness and hurt, and even instances of shame and guilt, um, the average person oftentimes wants to avoid. That's the number one thing that people often do. They want to avoid and distract themselves. They don't want to feel. the intense emotion. But one of the things that I encourage people to do is you have to allow a space for you to grieve. Back when my brother died, back years back, I remember being in grad school. And one of the things that I did is I had never allowed myself to grieve. My brother died on a day. I remember on a particular day, I remember going to work the next day. I literally, I think, only took off work for the funeral, but I had never stopped working. I was so distraught. I remember breaking down in one of my one of my classes. But after everybody had left, and one of my colleagues had pulled me aside, was like, talk to the professor, talk to the professor. Has she not do that? And I love her. She know I'm talking about her. She watched this. But had she not did that, I would have kept going to class because I was on autopilot. I didn't want to deal with those emotions. I didn't want to feel them. And so that's what the average person does. And so what I would encourage you to do is allow space for yourself to grieve. Take time off of work so you can grieve, not only for the death situations, even if it's a relationship. We got time. Take time off of work to allow yourself to grieve. And when I encourage people to do too, if you're a person that kind of like struggles with being with it, is set some intentional time for grieving. So what I mean by that, if you know you're in a sad space, don't stop everything. Like, you still want to care for yourself, whether it be a walk or, going to the gym or reading or whatever, but set some intentional time aside to grieve. So I remember for me, what that looked like is, I would have to, I knew that I was overwhelmed after the course of the day. I knew I was going to get my business done. But at night, maybe at 7 o'clock every night, I would just set some time to be present with my emotions and just cry. Just allow all of the tears to come out and just cry. So maybe that's for, someone that's hearing this. Like, you may need to set some intentional time aside just to grieve, to allow it to flow. The next thing is you need to continue to establish community. The average person, when they begin to experience grief or loss in some capacity, they isolate. They don't want to be around anybody. And that just increases the darkness, that heightens the depression. I really encourage people that even when you're going through, as hard as it may be, as difficult as it may be for you, still make sure you're establishing a sense of community. When people reach out to you, answer the phone. Maybe you have to connect with a grief support group. My family's from West Philly. And so I had connected with a grief support group in West Philly. And that I will never forget what they were for me and my family during our hard time. So it might be that you have to connect with the support group, but don't isolate. That's huge. And then the third thing I would definitely encourage people to do is don't forget to take good care of yourself. Mm-hmm. So again, that autopilot syndrome that I'll call it, but that autopilot will say, keep going, keep working, don't stop, keep going. Like, it's like a hamster wheel. You just keep going and you don't want to deal with life. But taking good care of yourself would be, even while you're grieving, you're going through those that grieving space, still allow time to maybe 5 minutes, get a bottle of water. Just be present with yourself and drink a bottle of water. Maybe take a 15-minute walk around the block. Still do your therapy sessions. You understand? So find ways to, and I tell people, last thing I tell people, this is how I knew I had a problem. I didn't even want to make time to lotion myself. If you're ashy, you might, I'm serious. And it's I can laugh at it now, but I remember I was going so fast with life. I didn't even want to put lotion on. I was out the door quick. So that might be an indicator that you need to self-examine, that you need to pull back and really take good care of yourself. So I would encourage those three things for people that are experiencing grief.
Now I gotta go the opposite way, because I thank you for that, and I'm thinking for a person like myself. And again, you said about West Philly. What about the people who are accustomed to loss? And what I mean by that is I don't grieve loss. Like, I'm so like how can I say, disengaged to loss of, like, because I'm like, people don't make space for loss. Like, and when I say people, society, like, it's like, hey, we know you lost a loved one, but we you got to come to work tomorrow, or like, life don't stop, the world don't stop because loss happened into your life. So I still don't know how, and of course I've been to therapy or whatever, but I just don't have, like, I turned that emotion off of like loss. Like, I don't really like grieve or cry or whatever like that. And I think about those young brothers, they lose so many brothers to the streets or to the jail, or they got to deal with wounds of like betrayal or different things like that, where they just so used to dads leaving communities, and they're just so used to just loss, and you just become numb to it. I don't want to say how do you turn it back on, but what would you say if someone showed up into your office like that? That's a better question, I guess.
Well, definitely, I always encourage therapy, but I'll get to that. Therapy is always something that can kind of help you get through that barrier, or that wall or that guard that you keep up. But even before you get to that, I just wanted to add that when you think about grief, so the feelings that I remember being very heightened for me were like sadness and depression. But again, for you, Reg, the grief experience still could be happening, but it just may show up differently for you. So
Hmm.
your grief experience can show up in the form of anger. It can show up in the form of just like being very, very anxious or kind of like irritable all the time. So even though I'm not dismissing that you say you're not experiencing grief, but I just want people to be very aware that again, the grief experience may look very, very different. So essentially, just because a person like isn't like kind of sad and down and withdrawn, doesn't mean they're not grieving. It could just look very different for them. And I know with men and women, we often, know that our expressions of emotions look very, very different. So what grieving may look like for a man, it may not look like for, me. So that's one thing to reference as well. But if an individual definitely is experiencing like a numbness around that, definitely can be an indicator of trauma, even beyond an index trauma, like a single incident, especially in the communities of color. We know there are recurring incidents of trauma. So not that someone experienced one incident, literally we'll be in a counseling session and they'll talk about a trauma experience and they'll leave it to go back into a war zone where they're then experiencing gunshots or whatever the case may be. So in that opportunity, in that space, excuse me, where there is like an ongoing degrees of trauma, what I encourage people to do and what I try to do with my clients is helping them to establish resources. So always, I always give them with the external resources, but internal resources. What I mean by that is people have to be able to find ways to connect with themselves and help themselves feel safe, even when the external world is like chaotic. And it's very difficult to do. But internal resources is one thing that I try to help my clients establish, just to build a level of safety, even when the external world is so chaotic. So that might be teaching them to resort to their breaths, recentering to their breaths and deep breathing when they need to be calm or when they're feeling overly anxious, or just finding ways to either play music to kind of get them to a peaceful state, or just whatever they can do kind of inwardly to help them calm and kind of ground themselves is one thing that I teach. Because again, they can't really control the external environment. Some of our clients are very fortunate that where they can walk out the door and be in the suburbs, and be
Hmm.
in 191 each to blip, but a lot of ours can't. And so sometimes the only resource that they have immediate access to is those internal resources. So teaching them how to internally ground themselves by way of skills and all of that, that they can resort to easier than it would be to access things externally, like groups and things like that. I try to teach them that first, that internal, engaging with those internal resources.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I always think, am I like a not a narcissist? What's the word I'm looking for? Like, because I don't get sad when people pass on, that it got to be something wrong with me, and I'm like I'm of course I'm like like, oh, that is sad. I can see how you lost that person, or if I and I'm like, maybe you just never lost someone that close to you for you to feel like that, but I just like I understand like loss, I guess. Like, and for
Mm,
I don't feel the need to get sad about it. I don't know. As you see, I'm still working through the thought, but
absolutely.
it's like I try not to not be empathetic, but I don't want to put it on somebody else who's grieving, and I look like what's wrong with you? This is a sad moment. Why are you not? And I'm like, that's not the emotions that it evokes out of me. I don't know what's wrong with
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. So, and as you referenced, that's because early on you had just recurring instances. Is you're numb to it. Like for me, I don't jump at gunshots. Like people are like, Rashida, you're not. No, I'm not, because when I was growing up, like it was commonplace. So
Mm.
your background permitted you with so many experiences of loss that it's not second nature. But what I would say to you, even in therapy, or if someone else, not even directed to you, but someone else who might be experiencing that and they want to kind of like uncover that more as to why that is, definitely that inner child work can help. With it there doing that inner child work can definitely help kind of uncover what some of those guards are, and those, those onion layers that are kind of impacting you or preventing you from getting in touch with those feelings, whether it be sadness or whatever it is. There's something there that's kind of preventing you from getting in touch with those feelings. And for a lot of people, it's a safety mechanism. You know, just having that in place. Like if you're a person that constantly experience those levels of trauma, you know, being able to have that safeguard up, it was a safety net for you. That actually like served as a safety net for you to kind of get through life because you experienced it. So for you, it was a safety net. But now that you're at a place where you want to kind of see things differently and kind of get access to your emotions, you know, that's where that therapy session comes in to kind of help you uncover, you know, why you present the way you do, and then also offer you skills to kind of get in touch with that side of you, because you can. And I think there's this misconception that men can't, you know, men shouldn't cry and men shouldn't have access to those feelings. But you can, just like anybody else. It's just, how do I do that? Why am I presenting this way? And how can I gain access to that side of myself?
No, I appreciate that. Again, they charge for this tomorrow, so I take it. I take everything that you're giving tonight as a appreciation as a tool. So, talk to me about this. Deliver us from darkness. Of course, I was going to plug the book in, and for those of you who are listening, and you're not watching the YouTube and the visuals, Miss Rashida Henry has a book out, and I have it up on the screen. So check it out on YouTube. It's called "Deliver Us from Darkness." Can you tell us a little bit about it? I got it up the website where they can go get it, of course. But just tell us about that.
Oh, I appreciate that. So Deliver Us from Darkness is my baby. But it's literally, the title speaks for what the book is about. And it's me it talks about my journey of overcoming seasons of depression and illuminating purpose. And so again, when we talked about, you know, millennials kind of benefiting from, you know, hearing like the practical stuff from somebody that looks like them, that's what I offer here in this book. It is, in fact, though, a poetic memoir, meaning it goes through periods of my life, but a lot of the dark periods and even periods of illumination are captured by way of poetry. As I referenced to you early on, I struggled with esteem and confidence. So I was very introverted. So I found my outlet in drawing. I'm great with drawing, and I love to write. So that's how I found my outlet. So before I was comfortable enough to kind of speak to a therapist and connect with people, that's what I always did. And so I remember waking up one day and looking through my books, and I said, "Oh my gosh, you got so much poetry." And at the time of which I was writing those poems in my darkest space, I never in a million years thought I would be actually putting it in a book to share it with other people. And so one day I had woke up and God said, "You got to share this because someone needs to be delivered." And it's power in the testimony. And I think that so many times people share their success, but they don't share where they came from. And you know what I mean? And when you share where you've come from, and when you share what you had to dig through, it gives the people hope so that they know that they can get there too. And so that basically, you know, what my book is, it talks about my journey of overcoming, and it provides, you know, skills. There's a little journaling in the back, a playlist and things like that are offered there to give you tools to kind of navigate your life. And I say this also, if you're a person that's trying to maybe support or offer someone guidance who is not really sold that therapy is very helpful, this book could be useful for them too, because this is like, when I talk about planting the seed of wellness, this book is very practical in that it can help kind of plant that seed for people who are not quite ready for therapy. It can kind of give them that jump start.
No, I appreciate you for sharing that. I'm gonna put an order in right now. I'm gonna put an order in on the
I
website,
appreciate you.
and I'm gonna get my book tonight and get it delivered, and we're gonna make sure it get to me. But I just wanted to, show off the services because you do a lot, especially for the community and just work and offering counseling, of course, support groups, workshops, training. Then, like you said, you focus and help the millennials with the career mentoring and just trying to make sure that we're successful. I feel like millennials sound so young like a few years ago. Now we're getting up there a little bit. So
Right.
I appreciate you for the work that you do. Make sure you guys follow and subscribe on everything that she has going on to keep up to date. She gives out a bunch of, look, I had it all up. I told you what make me comfortable is prepared
Thank
to
you.
be in these spaces every week. So She
Thank
has a lot of
you.
great information and tips out there. So make sure you follow and subscribe. And again, if you're just listening to this, you could check out the YouTube. But her Instagram and information will be in the show description. As we close out, do you have any final words that you want to leave the people? Anything you want to leave from the conversation?
Just that, unhappiness is not a permanent state. While you feel whatever state you're in, you may feel like that's it. I remember when I was there, I felt like, God just dealt me with this slate and I'm gonna have to deal with it. But I want you to know, if you're listening, that unhappiness is not a permanent state. There is a way out. There are wellness resources and tools that can help you live a better life. You just have to tap in and just, I'm thankful for you, Reginald, who is a person that is giving the community access, giving, the marginalized communities, or even people that aren't marginalized, but just don't have access to this. You are giving them firsthand access. And so know that the resources and the supports are there. And like Reginald said, if you need any support from me or any direction, I'm available. And knowsnoface.com, you can find all of my contacts. But I just appreciate you for allowing me to be here today.
No, thank you. And one thing I want to start saying, I'm gonna start saying that a lot more. Y'all gotta take advantage of these therapists when they say free consultation. You know how much you can get just from the consultation and the amount of value you get from that phone call. And no shade to therapy because I understand it, but if you get about 5 consultations from different therapists, you could probably get a wealth of information.
Yep, yeah.
Get a bunch of therapy
Yeah,
in that type of way. But no, I appreciate you for coming on and thank you for the amount of value that you provided during this conversation. And
you're
on
welcome.
that note, follow, subscribe, do all of those good things for the podcast, and make sure you leave a comment. The comments help on Apple Podcasts, make the algorithm or do something that I hear other podcasters saying. So, uh, remember that this platform has never been about a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.